I'll wait for the tunes to go down. Welcome to New Energy. This is an event that was dreamt up less than 3 weeks ago by my very good friend Holly Rankin from Jack River. She's a crazy cat, and many of us have met her through Instagram, and in fact I've met many of the people here on the panel and also asking questions this evening via Instagram. It's a wonderful climate community connector. I am Sarah Wilson. I'm your moderator for the first part of the panel, and we're going to be looking at the new energy economy. We're going to pull apart the nuts and bolts. I've been asked to introduce myself a little. I'm an author, a former journalist, and an activist. And just for a bit of context, I started out in the press gallery doing research for Michelle Grattan. I then moved to Melbourne and shared an opinion page at the age of 23 with Andrew Bolt on a Friday. I know exactly why I was placed there. It was a juxtaposition that I think worked for News Limited at the time. And then I moved on to editing Cosmopolitan at the age of 29. And during that time, I was quite engaged in the climate movement, rather ironically, given it's a veritable Bible of stuff that nobody needs. But I didn't own a handbag, I rode a bike, and of course most recently I got rid of most of my stuff or whittled it down to one bag, and I travelled the world as a nomad for 10 years writing books, the most recent of which is called This One Wild and Precious Life, and it aims to pave a hopeful path through the current climate clusterfuck we find ourselves in, and I don't think I need to spell that out to anyone in this room or on this panel. So look, tonight we have assembled a cool crew of youthful celebrities. They're based down here, and they'll be coming up on stage and asking youth-like questions about this new energy economy of our wonderful panel here. But before we get to that, I'm going to welcome Uncle Alan Madden for a welcome to country. Thank you, Uncle.
Thank you. Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for my first song, nah, only kidding. Married man, not kidding. 10 children, 26 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. Yes, we did have TV. Just couldn't afford the electricity. Born and bred in Redfern. Downtown Redfern. As we've all welcomed the countries, first and foremost I'd like to acknowledge our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, and pay my respects to all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters. From whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state, or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. As I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only 3 things shorter than that: coming, taxation, and going. It's an honour and a pleasure to be here tonight to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own, the Hawkesbury River to the north, Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. And in between those 3 mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans. And the clan's land we're on this evening is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you. And as you travel across these traditional lands and waters, may the spirits of our ancestors guide, look over you, and keep you safe. So once again, on behalf of Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
So here we are at the end of 2020, and as I said before, we're ensconced in the clusterfuck. It's the climate crisis, we've got a pandemic, we've got animals being made extinct. We know where we're at, and I think in Australia we're in a particularly tricky situation where we know where we're at, we want to change, but we feel very hamstrung by the leadership when it comes to energy policy in particular. We've got a government that's refusing to commit to the Paris Agreement. We sit at the bottom of the Climate Change Performance Index primarily because we do not have a climate policy. And instead everyone's sort of debating stuff in and around CO2 tonnage, and we're talking a lot of political speak and backwards and forwardsing. Now, the upshot of that is, of course, we feel very overwhelmed and we can feel very empowered. I think particularly young people. It's like, well, why bother? And it's a very particular psychological reaction to overwhelm, is to shut down and feel there's no point. But tonight, it's about cutting through all the dumb rhetoric that we are so sick of, the avoidance speak, and saying it straight and getting straight to the hopeful stuff, because there's some really good, hopeful stuff happening here in New South Wales. I should say we've actually asked the panel this evening to do something different. It shouldn't be that radically different, and I think everybody here is very up for it, and that is to talk straight once and for all. We all need straight answers on some of the questions that our youthful celebrities are going to be asking, and to also to talk kind. This is something that I bring up in my book, and I bring it up quite a lot, and there's a Rumi quote for just about every scenario you'll find, and this one is one of my favourites. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. Let's meet there. And I think that's sort of where we're at here tonight. It's where we're at in the climate debate. So on that note, I'll introduce you to the panel. So here on my left, we've got the Honourable Matt Keane. Now, he's the New South Wales Minister for Energy and the Environment, but most notably, well, you've just come back from, I think, liberating numbats down south, and you join us here in Sydney, but having last week orchestrated what is deemed to be, I suppose, the most ambitious energy plan in the country, and it's committing to supporting $32 billion to energy or renewable energy infrastructure by 2030. That is something that actually got me crying last week, and everybody in my orbit saying, my God, thank goodness, there's actually some hope on the horizon. More blowing, yes, a round of applause. Perhaps even more mind-blowing than that is you did it by forming something of a bromance with his opposition. And in fact, getting a whole bunch of people in that Rumi's field together, perhaps not Mark Latham, who I think threw 249 amendments at this legislation. Have I got that right? 247, 249?
249.
249. I mean, and just following him on Twitter, it's highly entertaining. He's actually blowing a gasket out there somewhere. He's not here in the audience this evening, is he? No, we can't hear anything, so that's a sure sign. But yes, you formed something of a bromance. It's not my wording, I've heard it out there, with the Honourable Adam Searle, who is, now let's get your title because it's slightly different, isn't it?
It is.
It is. It's the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and we won't pull apart the difference there in the wording, but you united with Matt in getting this incredible move happening here in New South Wales, and I think that's incredibly significant, and we'll go into that shortly. Over here, we've got Richie Merzian, and we met at a barbecue not so long ago, didn't we, in Canberra? It turns out there's a connection everywhere here. Knows two of my brothers, as it turns out. I have many brothers, and you know two of them, I believe. He's the Climate and Energy Program Director at the Australian Institute, and you'd see a number of reports coming out of that independent think tank based in Canberra. Does incredible work in this space. Immediately to my right, we've got Professor Penny Sackett, and also from Canberra, that's right, isn't it? A physicist, astronomer, and chair of the ACT Climate Change Council, and you were the chief scientist for Australia from 2008 to 2011, a very impressive role. On the far right, we've got Sophia Hamblin-Wong, and pronounced that correctly, haven't I? Wonderful. A climate nerd, I would have to call you that, wouldn't I? I should point out she can solve a Rubik's Cube in 35 seconds. Oh, wow. But on top of that, she's an entrepreneur who can turn CO2 into building materials. That's quite a feat. And yes, and very interesting. And then finally, on my far left, your right, Councillor Jess Miller. Also happens to know a few of my brothers, randomly, in Canberra. The former Deputy Lord Mayor of Sydney and now councillor, an independent councillor here in Sydney, who has been integral to some of the stuff that we see going on here, the really exciting stuff to do with regenerative cities, as well as getting this city well ahead of its targets in terms of renewable energy and emissions. So, just as an important aside, the whole panel is made possible by Future Super Australia's first fossil-free super fund. It's hard to say when you've got a slight lisp. Bank of Australia, the bank using money as a force for good for people who believe in a fair and just world. And our media partner, the Daily Oz, which I really recommend you follow on Instagram. They break down the news into the best tidbits. If you don't read the news, it's a really great way to get your information. Okay, I'm going to kick off with a really quick panel warmer, and again, we're talking straight answers. Christmas is coming up, and we all have the proverbial recalcitrant uncle who sits at the end of the table and denies climate change every Christmas. It drives us all mad. Can each of you, and I'll start with you, Jess, down the end, can each of you give me a barbecue stopper statement that works every time? And it might be something that you share out in the world and generally gets people to go, yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Well, I would ask, so that beautiful bush block or that fantastic mansion that you have right on the cliff, how much do you reckon that's going to be worth in 10 years? So I start, property in Sydney, obviously everybody wants to talk about, but connecting property with climate risk exposure and money, it's a winner.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah, your uncle owns property in Kirkconnell. No. Wonderful. Yeah, no. Adam.
Well, very similar to Jess. I live in the Blue Mountains, which is a lovely place, but there's a lot of bushfire risk. You say to people, are your insurance premiums going up every year? We are constantly at risk of bushfire, and of course premiums keep increasing in line with risk. If you don't combat climate change, will you be able to keep affording your property?
Good one.
It's straightforward.
Yep. Matt?
I like to ask my mad uncles what qualifications, other than being able to repeat Alan Jones's talking points, they have to talk about climate change. I'm always interested to know how qualified they are in atmospheric physics or energy economics. I, in fact, encourage them to write scientific papers because, if they can prove these bizarre claims that they have, they'll win a Nobel Prize. So, I'm always interested in talking to my Sky News after dark watching relatives and trying to add rationality to the discussion. Yeah. It's a great challenge and it provides plenty of entertainment in our family at Christmas.
It'll go all the way through to that sort of passed out state on the couch at the end of the evening, I'm sure. What about you? What have you got up your sleeve?
Well, I have an uncle. He's not crazy. But what I like to do is ask people where they're getting their information from and what they've heard, and then start with that. And so my uncle found a website that told him that volcanoes put up more CO2 every year than human beings. And so we just talked through that, and it was pretty easy, actually. He believes NASA, and you find a NASA website that explains volcanoes. And he said, I have to admit, I think you're probably right about that.
Nice. And there's also Snopes. I wonder if NASA can explain exploding horse manure, because that apparently causes climate change as well, right?
You should ask the Deputy Prime Minister on that one.
Yeah, I don't think. I'll get Matt to do that one, I think.
I'm not sure he's talking to me at the moment.
Oh, really? Oh, he's not in Rumi's field with us right now. Richie.
Well, I'd be tempted to try and go the economic route. I know that it'll just end up in a circular argument. So I'd ask what they were doing during the Black Summer bushfires, whether that affected them, whether it affected their health, what they did, whether they're worried that that's going to happen more and more often, and whether they're worried about their kids and their future, and try and go for the feels.
Okay. Hashtag exploding horse manure might be the retort, but Sophia.
I might just draw together a couple of things that we've said, because I've actually had this crazy uncle conversation many times, because I'm from far north Queensland, and every time I go home, I have to tell people what I do. And they say, oh, how have you been, Soph? What have you been doing? And I say, oh, I work in climate change technology. And quite often there's a pause. And this is a place where our insurance premiums have gone up so much because we've been bashed by cyclones. It's almost unaffordable. They say, you don't believe in climate change, do you? And I always pick them up on that language. And that's what I would urge everybody else to do. It's that it's not a question of belief. It's not a question of faith. It's a matter of an assessment of the facts and the scientific papers. And if you have made an assessment based upon that and done a proper literature review, I'm happy to keep talking, but if not, we don't have any more conversation to have.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. So Holly's asked me to kick off by explaining the fundamentals of what we're hearing about a lot, this net zero emissions, carbon emissions by 2050. This is probably one of the most significant kind of goalposts and points of reference that we should be talking about right now, and every politician should be talking about this right now. And I think 2021 is going to be all about this. So I'm going to give it a crack, but I will ask Richie and Penny to give me a bit of a hand if I get anything wrong. Chime in, and if I get some details incorrect. You too, Sophia, quote some science back at me. So, to be able to survive global warming, we need to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Now, can I just check, Richie? Does that mean 1900 or so, if we're talking pre-industrial levels, or?
I mean, it's probably a bit before that even as well.
Late 1800s.
Sure, yeah. But and Penny is the scientist.
Does it matter? What?
It doesn't matter much.
Okay.
And the reason is because most of the increases happened since 1950.
Yep, okay.
But generally people use round about 1850.
Okay. Yeah. So 1.5 degrees, it's got to be less than 1.5 degrees above what it was back then before emissions really started to skyrocket. To do this, we need to have net zero CO2 emissions into the atmosphere by 2050 and 50% by 2030, which of course is 9 years away. We're not talking a long time away. What's net zero? Well, it means the amount overall. So it doesn't mean absolutely no carbon emissions. It means that the overall amount in the atmosphere has to be zero. So it's a twofold approach, right? It's cutting the emissions, but also finding a way to get rid of the emissions already in the atmosphere through planting trees that can suck it into the earth, et cetera, et cetera. All good so far? All right, excellent. And I think a lot of people get confused about that net zero, why that's so specific. Of course, we're always going to be producing some emission. It's about having that twofold approach. We're also going to draw it back down. So, of course, the world has shaken hands on the Paris Agreement. So over 100 governments have agreed to it. And Australia, the federal government, is the only government that has not done that. I mean, it's an absolute embarrassment. Now, that said, New South Wales and all the other states, many of the local councils, including the City of Sydney, as well as the biggest banks, the Business Council of Australia, Woolworths, Aldi, I mean really big institutions have also committed to essentially this Paris Agreement because it's a no-brainer from a whole range of angles, including economics. So I'm going to kick off with a question from Holly, since you've put me through the paces with explaining net zero emissions. Do you want to put your question to the panel?
Of course. So I would like to ask, oh, hi guys. And thank you so much, panel, for joining us tonight. I'd like to ask Penny and Richie, why is climate change the biggest problem we need to be caring about?
Do you want to kick that off?
Okay. I think there are several reasons. One reason is because it affects every other problem that is occurring at the moment in some way, and mostly by making it worse. It's sometimes called a threat multiplier. So clearly it makes environmental degradation worse, the discrepancy in wealth status of refugees. There are just a whole number of things, and climate change only makes it worse. So that's one answer. The second answer is that we don't have much time actually to act. In fact, I would say that the critical decade is between now and 2030. So I'd be focusing on 2030 and watching what action is happening in that period more in a way than what's happening in 2050. And then the third reason I would say is because if we do not act swiftly in the next decade, there is a possibility that certain subsystems in the Earth climate system may tip irreversibly into a different state, and one that it's very hard to come back from, even by pulling down emissions out of the air. So it's the comprehensiveness of climate change, it's the speed with which we need to act, and it's the risk of irreversible change unless we act in the next decade swiftly.
Richie, maybe you can also talk to the point that it's quite confusing because we talk about plastics and recycling and there's all these other things floating around. Climate change is the big kahuna, right?
Yeah, climate change it's all the things, right? It's more bushfires, more floods, more sea level rise, more ocean acidification, more intense cyclones. Like those are the immediate impacts. And sometimes they're not sequenced, they happen on top of each other as well. And then they have consequences. Some areas will lose their ability to have private insurance. They'll become red zones. Their property values will crash. Like Western Sydney can expect 5 times more days over 35 degrees within the lifetime of many of the young people in this audience. So what does that mean for people who work in construction or tourism or sport? So it'll change the entire way we live, how we work, how we operate, how we play. And if we don't address it, it could potentially get out of control, which is why now is the time to act.
And I think for anyone who's listening to this and wanting to get involved, which is in some ways the aim of this evening, it's important to get involved in reducing plastics and getting engaged in recycling, but the really big concern is climate change, and it's the really big issue we need to be following. Okay, next up, we have a question from musician Ruben Stiles from Peking Duck. Ruben, are you there? Yeah. Yeah, awesome.
Cool. Hey.
Hey.
How you going? This one's, I guess, a little bit more policy-based. It's a bit more about, I guess, a few years ago when I saw Volkswagen got caught for having their clean diesel, genius science revolution, they were kind of bullshitting everyone. But I think it's happening a lot in products, especially around the world. There's a bit of a trend, you want to be green and buying green, and everyone wants to be doing that. And I guess it's happening more and more is this falsified greenwashing, but like the Australian consumer law doesn't have any rules against greenwashing. You're not allowed to mislead anyone, but there's nothing strictly about greenwashing. So I want to know, what can we do to draw a line in greenwashing, and how do we make it very clear what is greenwashing, and how do we, I guess, sell it to government and say, hey, we need to turn this into a policy?
I might actually, because it's a policy-orientated thing, I might get Jess. Are you okay to speak to that one?
Yeah.
I've put you on the spot here, but...
Yeah, I mean, oddly enough, I've been working for an agency that works in sustainability and behaviour change for a really long time. And this crops up again and again, and I think what it generally indicates is actually kind of positive, because what brands are realising is that consumers have greater expectations for how they behave. I don't know that setting rules around what you can and can't say, I don't know the answer to that, honestly, I don't know. But I think what would be really valuable is, and what the big opportunity is to really think about supply chain and supply chain visibility. And that's a huge opportunity for tech. I think personally understanding where our food comes from is so critically important, and also making sure that we're supporting local economies so that we can have more confidence in things that come from here. And so, yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword. I don't know if we need to go straight I don't know what the policy would look like, but I'm sort of, I think when people are greenwashing, it's important because they're realising that we as a community actually really care.
Yeah, and I think the world's caught on to it, and even since that Volkswagen example, I think people, social media spreads these messages, and I've noticed that companies are a lot more aware of making sure they get their information and are seeking out experts to actually consult with them on these matters. Sophia, did you have anything, just given you're an entrepreneur in this space, did you have anything to say on that?
So I totally agree with Jess in that we need to be able to measure and validate claims of where things come from. And I think that we actually all have a lot more power to share information nowadays. It probably doesn't need to go all the way to legislation, because I think the market actually responds very poorly when people do greenwash. I mean, we share that at length, so we probably don't need to go to that level. But now with blockchain and all kinds of supply chain validation, I think if we can share that information and get brands to embrace when they're doing things well and share the good stories, I think that's also going to be really powerful.
Yeah, cool. Okay, next we've got a question from Lewis Hobber. I think you're out there from Triple J. Have you? Yep, there he is.
Hello, how are you? My question's probably for this side of the panel as well, but feel free to tee off, team. It's about jobs in the economy. Jobs in the economy seems to be used by politicians as an excuse for politicians who don't want to take action on climate change. But 4 out of 5 Australian CEOs say that climate change is hurting our economy. So why is it so hard for politicians to sell the message that action on climate change will actually be better for our economy?
Can I kick off,
yes.
Lewis?
I'll go down, but kick off.
So, as Sarah said in the introduction, we've just got through a huge package of reforms to our electricity system. And the way we've been able to do that is by having a laser-like focus on the economics.
Yeah.
Our entire policy was about how do we deliver cheap, reliable energy? How do we do it while creating jobs and driving investment into the state? So that was the, I guess, parameters around which we designed the policy. It was making sure that those most vulnerable in our community would benefit from really cheap electricity prices, new jobs, new opportunities. So we didn't introduce this policy just because we wanted to be good custodians of our planet, which we do. We introduced it because we want to make sure that Australia becomes, New South Wales becomes, and indeed our country becomes, not only an energy superpower, but an economic superpower. And with 70% of the world's, of our two-way trade, now with countries that have committed to achieving net zero emissions by mid this century, for a small open market economy like Australia, if we don't get ahead of the curve, then we really risk becoming a rust bucket state and nation. We risk these future opportunities and jobs which are emerging. I mean, that two-way trade, those 70% of countries, now with Joe Biden in the White House, it's 70%. Being able to trade internationally has underwritten our prosperity for generations. We know where these global megatrends are heading. We know the new markets that are emerging. And because of our ability to get really cheap energy because of renewables, we're able to be a world leader in helping satisfy the demands of those emerging markets.
So Matt, can I ask, just to hone in there, working to the straight answer principle, your modelling for this new strategy, is it going to create more jobs and more economic growth? I guess yes or no, like in New South Wales? Yes.
Yes, overwhelmingly.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we want to know. And Adam?
But there are two things here. People are always sceptical about what they can't see, and they're sceptical of politicians' promises about what might come. And so what you see in this space is people saying, well, okay, where are these new jobs? What are they going to be?
Yep.
And are they going to be as well paid as the jobs we're frightened of losing?
Yeah.
So Matt's right. This is actually vital to our economic future, not only because cheaper energy will actually drive competitiveness and more jobs, not only because building new renewable energy will create jobs, but also by being able to sort of turbocharge our manufacturing sector with this new energy, we can actually create more better paid jobs as well. But it requires a bit of faith by the community that we can actually deliver that. And to actually directly answer the question that just got posed, people are sceptical of politicians' promises, which is why this is so vital that it was a cross-party proposition and supported on a cross-party basis.
And you guys have been super open about this, that if there is a change of government, this will still go ahead. That's why it's so cool that you have both agreed to this and you're all on board. Is that right?
Absolutely.
The beauty of it being a multi-party position is that it's going to be durable, and if Labor or the Greens or whoever wants to go further, then they can. But what we've done is move forward in an incremental way, and I think we'll only build on this further.
Look, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. and in this space, we've actually agreed on the framework, on the building blocks. You can dial things up or down, you can do things differently within that framework, but we've agreed on the playing field, as it were.
What you're what you're estimating is that it will create 6,300 jobs, and I think secure or keep another 2,500 jobs, I think, from memory. Is that around about right? And
that's the government's modelling, and we don't. I mean, obviously we've seen that, but
it also cut power bills. And I should ask this, Matt. I'm just going to talk tangibles for everyone.
Yep.
It'll cut power bills by several $100s for businesses and residents, but also put New South Wales in the top 10 for the lowest industrial electricity in the OECD. Is that correct?
Let's get the facts on the table. So this policy will deliver 6,300 construction jobs between now and 2030. It'll create 2,800 ongoing jobs, so people running these new sources of generation and transmission, maintaining all those assets. It'll deliver, between now and 2042, $58 billion worth of private capital coming into New South Wales. That's money flowing in, which will be a bonanza for the bush. And most importantly, it'll give us some of the cheapest reliable energy anywhere on the planet. And that's a huge competitive advantage for, as Adam said, those energy-intensive industries, heavy manufacturing, smeltering, all these things. And that'll create a spin-off of additional jobs. We'll have a competitive advantage on the world stage because of that cheap, clean, reliable electricity. And let me tell you, that will make sure that Australia is one of the economic powerhouses as we move to a low-carbon global economy.
I mean, we built our economy on cheap energy. We've got some of the best energy resources in the world, but we have stuffed it up and made it quite expensive, and it's vital that we recapture that sort of cheap energy.
We need to refocus and head in.
The reality is that the reason why, to answer Lewis's question, is that they have to talk about jobs and growth.
I know, exactly.
And it keeps going on. The reason, and I think what we've heard just now, is the story that needs to be told to people in a way, because at the heart of the matter is that if you go to somebody and you say, here is everything, if they feel the fear that you're going to take something away from them, they will fight you so hard. And I think what we've lacked in maybe the last couple of decades is it's really been a failure of imagination and a failure of storytelling to say, well, this is what we have to offer. And there hasn't been trust.
Talk radical positives, and I think that's where we're at. And I do think the momentum is growing. The pendulum has swung now. I think we are starting to talk that.
The pressure now is going to be, it's really about delivering it. So now, like all the promises in the world, is beautiful, and everyone has this huge sense of hope and optimism. But now the work really begins.
I'll let you finish.
Can I just say one thing to Lewis? 15 years ago, the decarbonising the grid came at a cost to the economy and to the electricity system. But today, the technology has changed. A lot of the new technologies come so far down the cost curve that now there's a cost to the economy for not decarbonising, and that's the difference. So the cheapest way to deliver electricity today is a combination of wind and solar and pumped hydro and batteries. Now, that wasn't the case 10 years ago. It probably wasn't the case 5 years ago, but today it is the case, and it's only heading in one direction. So now this is about taking the opportunity that new technology presents, that the economics have presented, and grabbing it to set ourselves up for success in the future.
Okay.
On just
Sorry, Richie. Yeah, very quickly and all.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, what has been a successful story that's been told is that Australia's national interest is the same as our fossil fuel interests. And that's been decades of successful marketing and lobbying, but it's just not true. Like if you look at renewable energy, there's 3 times more jobs in the renewable energy sector than all the coal and gas-fired power stations put together. But the Australian Institute asks people regularly, how many jobs do you think there are in the coal mining sector? They get it wrong. They think it's over 1 million Australians work in that sector when it's more like 50,000. When you ask them about the gas sector, again, they think over 1 million work in the gas sector and it's less than 25,000. Just in the last year, we went from 38,000 gas workers who work in gas extraction to 18,000. These mining interests, they know how to tell that story and to convince us that their interests are our interests, but that's no longer the case.
That's right, the jobs are drying up, and as you say, it's recent, and so that's why we're starting to talk these messages differently, and there is a positive message that we can tell. Matt, in terms of this legislation, can you tell me, there was something of a personal motivation here. You weren't always on board, but there was a little bit of a light bulb moment for you.
Well, I became the Minister for Energy 12 months ago. Gladys Berejiklian asked me to be her Minister for Energy and Environment. I thought, what have I done to upset you? But I had the opportunity to go to Europe in November last year, and it was just before COVID. And
the bushfires.
And the bushfires. And, you know, it's one thing to listen to the economists and the scientists and all the energy experts that I have available to me as the minister. And I feel like in the last 12 months I've done a PhD on the energy system. But it wasn't until I got to see what's happening on the global stage that the penny really dropped for me. And I was in the Netherlands and driving between the Netherlands and Belgium, I think at night, the entire countryside was lit up. And that was all the...
How can they afford that?
Well, that's exactly right. They had all the greenhouses, and the Netherlands is the highest producer of agricultural products anywhere in the world, and it's, you know, a country the size of a postage stamp, and it's because they're able to use really cheap energy, which they get from renewables, to, I guess, grow their, you know...
So these are these hot houses that are working 24/7, so they get 3 times the productivity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that's just one example. I met with the head of Shell, the global CEO of Shell, who said to me that this year they spent $25 billion on fossil fuel extraction and $3 billion on renewables. And by 2025, they're going to invert that. So this is big oil, you know, doing it not because they're greenies, because they're capitalists, right? You're seeing, I met the head of Engie, who runs the French nuclear program, and he told me that they're never going to build another nuclear reactor. And here in Australia, we've got these people talking about, oh, nuclear is the answer.
Yeah.
Well, I said, why are you not going to build a nuclear reactor? And they said, because renewables are far cheaper and more reliable, and the economics are way better for them. So
yes, we don't always get those messages here. What I'm interested in as well is, of course, just recently, the two of you, and I use the term bromance to describe the way that you guys were able to come into that field and get this legislation going through. It's not my words, bromance. I've heard it around the trap, so I suspect that, you know, there's some truth to it. Adam, can you explain how you were able to sort of arrive here at something that is really positive? It's not the usual kind of left versus right stuff where you're all point scoring. We've actually got something that kind of took us by surprise in some ways. And do you have any lessons for our friends in Canberra at the federal level, what they might be able to learn from it?
Well, I've got 2 things to say. What we've done in New South Wales puts Canberra to shame. This sort of thing should have happened a decade ago.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it was easy because Matt stole my homework.
Oh God, we had to.
But like the Labor Party has always believed that climate change is real, man-made, needs to be addressed, and we put together a policy scenario for the last election. We didn't win. Matt comes forward with a package that contained a number of the same elements, and we welcomed that. We congratulated him, and we said yes, we could send it off to an inquiry. Yes, we could say it's not perfect and try and load it up with all sorts of changes. We did put some good changes in that the government agreed to. But we said, no, we're not going to rerun 2010. We're not going to miss another opportunity to take real action. We will work with Matt and with the government, and we'll take them on good faith, and we will back in the plan. And we did.
It's so refreshing. I mean, God, this kind of language, what could Angus Taylor do? Could he eat just a slice of humble pie and go and speak to his friends in the opposition and go, look, you might be right on a few of these things, let's make it happen? Is there scope?
Look, there's always hope while there's life. It's just some things are more likely than others.
Well, there's a pulse, yes.
But look, what's happened here is Matt has followed the evidence. And, you know, I'm a barrister by trade. I like to think we deal in evidence. And I think the important thing is that the government legislation is not perfect. There are things we wouldn't have done. But we thought the most important thing was creating a bipartisan framework that we could all agree on and that would be durable beyond the life of any one government, because we need people to invest for the long term to build the next generation of our electricity supply.
Can I ask both of you before we move on, and I've got a very strict timetable here, was it fun to actually arrive at this? Like, did you actually fist pump or go home and go, I did something good today, like this feels good to agree with the opposition and actually to have a proper conversation and get something delivered? Did it feel good?
Well, it did, but what happens is that often in Parliament, the government and the opposition agree on more things than most people realise.
Right.
The differences are important, and there are a number of very significant differences of opinion between our two sides of politics. Yeah. But energy policy should not be one of them. And when this opportunity arose, yes, it was a good thing to do, it was a good thing to be part of, but it's only the beginning of this journey. It's not the end point.
Yeah, what about you, Matt? Fun?
It wasn't really fun when Adam and I had to sit through the night dealing with 249 vexatious amendments
from
by
our mate
Mark Latham.
I was in the chamber with him.
Yeah, well, that's true. I came into the chamber and they tried to drag me into
we had to send you away.
You had to send me away because that was going to drag it on even longer. But was it fun? I mean, what was fun is trying to find solutions to really complex problems. That's why people like Adam and I are mad enough to go into politics. And the problem was a really big one. And it wasn't the one you're probably all thinking. It's the fact that 4 of our 5 sources of electricity generation are going to come to the end of their lives in the next 15 years, and they need to be replaced. And we need to make sure that we replace them before they close to avoid massive price spikes and a less reliable electricity system. So what we were trying to do is make sure that the people of New South Wales got what they deserved, and that's really cheap, reliable electricity when our existing sources of that electricity generation are clapped out and are going to come to the end of their lives. So that's what we were trying to solve, to get a solution to that in a way that brings people together, to find common ground, to get a positive outcome. Yeah, it was refreshing, and I hope it's the new model for politics.
So do I, and I hope that you continue to have fun doing it, that's for sure, because it's got to be more charming than the alternative, otherwise change won't happen. I've now got a question from Sam Kozlowski from the Daily Oz, and as I said, follow them on Instagram. Sam.
Thank you so much, guys. So we've heard a lot about these major policy changes, but for the average young Australian, the big ticket items are solar panels, electric cars, some of those big contributions we want to make. What can government do to help young Aussies afford those kind of items? And why don't we keep answers to the length of a TikTok?
Well, I'm actually going to get Jess once again and Sophia to talk in a soundbite for us because we're running a little bit behind. Jess, young people, is this accessible? How can we make it accessible?
Yeah, of course there is. Simple things, ride your bike, compost, reduce your waste. Find out what's going on. Work out who your local councillor or MP is.
What are local governments and governments going to do to make all of this accessible to young people? They can't afford Teslas. They don't have homes to put solar panels on top of. What are governments going to do to make this new energy
I guess what we do is, we worked with Stucco, which is a local student housing cooperative, help them put and figure out how to run renewables on the roof. I think grant programs are really, valuable to local, state and federal government, because what it says is that it's an admission that we don't know what we're doing, and actually we're inviting people with new ideas, innovations, creativity to come in.
Ways to earn.
And figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's okay to fail. And then,
where can they find out about that?
oh, you can go to City of Sydney, Google City of Sydney innovation grants. There's heaps up for grabs, yeah.
Okay,
Knowledge
I won't ask
exchange.
you to share your email
Yeah.
this evening. But
jmiller@cityofsydney.nso.gov.au or Jess Miller Sydney on Instagram. It's very easy.
that's a good one. Sophia, what can make this accessible for young people? What should we be doing?
Frankly, it's just going to take ambitious government action in order for it to be affordable for young people like us. In the UK, they earlier this year set forth a ban on any new fossil fuel cars being sold by 2040. And they said, look, no new cars will be manufactured and sold, and the whole industry lined up behind them. They invested in new infrastructure. Private industry came in. There was increased competition, and you know what? They are ahead of their target. And just 3 weeks ago, they announced that they're going to bring it forward to 2030. Right? That's what government ambition can do. And I think we can look towards these two gentlemen and really thank them for showing what government ambition can do in New South Wales and in the federal government. And I think electric vehicles are a really good place to start.
Yes, Penny.
I might just add that we had an election in the ACT recently, and the new government that formed, a Labor Green government in this case, has announced $15,000 interest-free loans for anyone that would like to buy an electric car and 2 years free rego. So, and I think that we're going to see electric cars come down. I know we're going to see electric cars come down in price. And at some point, you know, everybody will be driving one. But governments do have an important role right now to get them on the road, to create not only those first buyers, but also so that a second-hand market is available.
Yeah.
And I think that would probably help a lot of young people as well.
Okay. Thank you, thank you. A question now from Daisy Jeffries. You may know her from pretty much the person on the stage at the Sydney, the climate strikes down in September, wasn't it? September 2019. She's got a question for the panel.
I just want to say a quick thing. I just feel like the bar is so low that we need to refer to bipartisanship as a bromance. And, you know, I was in Madrid last year and I heard, unfortunately, Angus Taylor talking about Australia's climate action while our country was burning. And he basically used Kyoto credits to skirt around the Paris Climate Agreement. I would say that the federal government we have now is not one that will commit to any climate action, let alone ambitious climate action. And what we need to do is vote in the alternative. And the alternative isn't excellent, but it's a hell of a lot better than the one we have now. Okay.
I'll take that as a comment, but Daisy.
So, Australians working in the fossil fuel industry are staring down a double-barreled gun. In one barrel sits a bullet, the increasing casualisation and automation of mines, and therefore a significant decrease in job security over the next decade. In the second, there is another bullet, and that's the climate crisis. The question I pose to the panel is, and particularly to our ministers and councillor, is as we struggle to commit to a transition to renewables across Australia, how can state and federal politics create a safe and just pathway for workers out of this industry? How can these communities around the country, which have for so long been dependent on a now dying industry, be best positioned for a clean energy future? Thank you.
Daisy, I'm going to actually, I might ask Richie, this is sort of an area that you've worked in, is the jobs area in this, and for young people like Daisy who are about to enter university. But I'd love a comment, a tangible, quick, was it TikTok answer from Adam or Matt as well?
Yeah, a lot of this change is happening outside of Australia. And I think Matt was alluding to this. Like Australia, most of the fossil fuels that Australia produces, it exports. Australia's the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. And so it has a major role in terms of contributing that to climate change, fossil fuels being the main source when consumed. But the three countries that import the majority of Australia's coal and the majority of Australia's gas have all committed to net zero, which means that they will stop buying our coal and gas. So this transition is going to happen. It's going to happen regardless. And what we need to do is take care of the people who are going to be caught out for it. And so actually refusing to adopt what we need to do in climate change is actually leaving them vulnerable. And the best thing we can do is develop transition authorities. They set up one in Victoria to transition away from some of the brown coal-fired power stations that are closing down, the La Trobe Authority. It invests in the community, it invests in jobs to transition people over, and it does so over 10 and 20 years. These are the kind of things, and I think there's something like that featured in the bill that was just passed as well, in terms of a transition authority. So we need to help these people move over, because the last thing we want is for them to be caught out.
Matt and Adam, do you have something quick to say to Daisy to give young people some hope?
Other than to say that we can't afford to leave anyone behind. And, you know, these communities have been powering our nation for generations, and we need to make sure that continues to be the case. And that's why we need to have an eye for the future. Where are these markets are heading, and how we are going to take advantage of them and grab the jobs and opportunities that have come with it. So that's what this plan is all about, making sure that the Hunter, that's why we've created as a renewable energy zone, so that new industries will spring up, energy intensive industries. There's a skilled labour force there. We need to make sure that they're ready to be available to support and fill these new good paying jobs. So, I mean, it's not just about energy policy, it's industry policy, it needs a whole of government.
Too, hey?
Look, too often economic change is a wrecking ball through local economies and local societies.
Adam, can I ask you maybe just to speak really straight to Daisy as to, just to answer the question in terms of what's going to happen to young people who need a job into the future?
Well, part of the impetus behind this package is to actually create new economic opportunities, new industries, not just through the building and operating of new energy sources, but through the cheaper energy that it produces actually powering the economy and economic opportunities. That's where the jobs of the future will come from. The key thing here is that economic change is always happening. In Australia, it's happened a number of times in the past. You can have
So what kinds of jobs, I'm just going to keep it on, because we're running behind time, unfortunately. What kind of jobs? What should young people be looking to study? Obviously, arts is out of the equation these days.
Well, they say people are going to change jobs many times during their career, and obviously there are lots of jobs that we can't begin to predict will exist. But one of the key things behind this energy package is to really drive manufacturing through procurement policy, rather than going offshore to buy our manufactured goods. We have a very skilled workforce in the Hunter and other parts of the state, investing here in New South Wales jobs and driving the economy forward that way. That's the best way to guarantee jobs.
Sophia, very, very quickly, but I'm sure you've got
Absolutely,
something
Adam. Yeah, I think this is the perfect time for me to talk, because the company that I work for, we transform carbon dioxide into building materials and other valuable industrial products, like this cement brick in my hand.
It's not a piece of coal, is it?
No.
A piece of cement,
Don't
right.
be afraid.
It's actually made from emissions though, so it's a transition technology that's going to be coming in and taking those resource processing jobs that are going to become available and turn them into green materials and all kinds of new things that we haven't even imagined yet. We can start to export green cements, green steel, all kinds of things. And technologies like mine have been being developed slowly, quietly in the background, but now is the time for us to accelerate.
Sophia, what did you study at university out of interest?
I studied business.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So to your point, Adam, people can move all around the place and yeah. Okay, David Pocock, I think you've got a question for the panel. I don't know if David needs too much introduction. Former Wallabies player and all-round environmental conservation legend.
I've got a question for the politicians. Having been part of non-violent direct action against a coal mine in the middle of a critically endangered forest habitat, what is the best way for young people to be heard? What actually is going to change minds? How can young people get action from politicians to create a future that's not, an economy at the expense of farmers, our forests, our reef, basically everything we love.
I think to use Jess Miller's wording is, how can young people be a good pest?
Oh, there's so many ways. There's like a whole spectrum of pests.
Without having to take a break from playing football, I know what you did to actually go and chain yourself to bulldozers and so on to do what you did. And I think that's just, it's ridiculous that we've got to do that.
Gnarly, yeah. Like
how can we be a good pest?
Well, I mean, it sort of depends where, like, you know, where you are in life. It's sort of that idea of like, you know, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, right? You know, in my 20s, yes, definitely, I 100%, you know, locked myself onto coal infrastructure at Newcastle and brought that to its knees as part of MVDA, because at that time in my life, the letters weren't getting through, the newspaper articles weren't getting through, nobody cared. And we used to fantasize about Australian sports legends doing similar things, or, you know, we sit there and fantasize back, oh my God, imagine if Vogue were talking about climate change. And this was not that long ago. So I think to be a good pest really depends on where you're at and what you can do.
What works as a counsellor now? What works and gets the dial shifting?
I think, I mean, I'm very conscious.
For everyday people coming to you and...
Oh, yeah, I mean, there are some really, like, obviously people who are really noisy get heard. And they're not always the people that deserve to be heard. And so oftentimes you have the not in my backyarders, so you've got the NIMBYs, you know, and Jess Scully says this so much more eloquently than I do, but what we really need to hear from are the YIMBYs, the yes in my backyarders that say, hey, you know what? You know, parking, this is my life, right? Parking is really important, but not as important as trees. If we want to live in a city that is cool, that has biodiversity, that has beautiful birds and butterflies and is really pretty, you know, some of us will need to forego some convenience.
So what can people do? The grants is a really great suggestion.
Grants is good.
They're coming to you with a positive concept that can shift the community. That's one way.
You know,
how else can they get heard on something really important? They want the City of Sydney to change on.
You can do a petition. You can come and speak at committees. But these, unfortunately...
People listen to those, though.
They do, yeah. I reckon they totally do, yeah. I mean, they definitely do. But unfortunately, our political systems, like showing up to a committee or, you know, not many young people know what a notice of motion is. You know what I mean? So available to you, which is as equally, if not more powerful, I believe, is the internet. So galvanise the internet, use social media to organise, and you know, the role of politicians at a local level, a state level, a federal level, is to represent your community. And if you don't believe that the person who has that role represents your community, then change it. Like, run for council.
Run for council.
Run for council. It's not an easy job, but we need more young people, we need more Indigenous people, we need more people with different lived experiences to enrich our political dialogue.
Okay. Adam and Matt, can you just tell me one thing? Oh, yeah. There you go.
Thanks.
Could you just tell me very quickly, and I'm really sorry, we are running over time, and I've got a couple of more questions from people in the corner over here. What has worked for you when young people have wanted to make a difference and be heard on this? What can they do that actually does change people's opinions? And I know people think signing petitions doesn't make a difference, or writing a letter to their MP doesn't make a difference. Does it?
Well, I think it does. I mean, you've got to be part of the conversation, and Jess is right. Be a pest. You know, get active. You know, the children's school strike actually was a very important message to politicians that while we're bickering and not solving these problems, we're actually jeopardising the future for our children. You know, I've got teenage kids. I've got a stake in the future. The fact that school children took that action and so many people felt that they needed to take that action was a very strong reminder to me and to many of my colleagues that we were failing and not acting. And so activism like that is very important.
Noticed.
It is absolutely
Matt,
noticed.
what about you? Do you want to add that?
I agree, definitely speak up, don't sit on the sidelines, get involved, but I'd have a different argument to Jess and Adam, and that is don't be a pest, be a problem solver. Like, get involved, be part of the change. I mean, you know, a green group coming to see me as the Environment Minister, if they've teamed up with a farming group and they've come together and found common ground, it's far more persuasive than two sides yelling at each other in the debate. And yeah, I just encourage, you know, people, be active, stand up for what you believe, get involved, but try and understand what the other side of the debate is thinking, see if you can reach out to them and find common ground. That's what Adam and I did.
Yeah.
And
come to you with the problem and the solution is often the way to go about things.
Come with the solution.
Okay. Our next person who's going to ask a question, I'm doing that look where, yes, here we go. Heidi Lenfer, musician from the band Cloud Control and founder of Future Energy Artists. You've got a question for the panel.
I do. Thanks, everyone. So there's a lot of great sense being talked on the stage today, which is relieving. So this question is about the federal level of politics. And Matt, you're saying that we should be problem solvers, but we all know that the coal industry has a stronghold in Canberra. What can we do to bust that open, and what actual measures can we put in place to limit their influence?
Straight answer, Matt. What do you reckon?
Argue the facts, argue the economics. You know, those coal communities are really, really important, but let's be serious about this. The markets where that coal goes are changing and they're starting to demand different products. You know, in terms of electricity generation, the cheapest way to deliver electricity is no longer new coal-fired power stations, it's different technology. So we've got to make sure that we're sticking to the economics, sticking to the evidence, listening to the engineers and the experts. And that's how we won this debate in New South Wales. And I'm going to keep arguing the case, not just here, but at the national level. And I'm sure all of you who care about these issues will do that as well, whether it be supporting politicians like us or getting involved yourselves.
I'm going to, yes, sorry, just from you, Penny, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we should also take heart in a lot of the activity that's happening at the state and local level. I mean, honestly, I would say that the action on climate change that Australia has taken is because of state and local level and because of business.
Who aren't as in the pocket with the fossil
fuel industry. The ones that are acting aren't.
Yeah.
And so I would say that another thing you can do is really get active at the local and state level. And those elections, and frankly, sooner or later, the federal government will have to, you know, come, well, maybe screaming and kicking, but, you know, they'll have to come along.
I think that's really good advice. It's something that we often don't realise. Yeah, Richie, really quickly. Sorry to be impatient with your...
No, that's all right. I mean, there's a joke that there's as many jobs in the coal industry in Canberra as there are on mine sites because there's so many lobbyists there. The Minerals Council of Australia has the closest office to Parliament House in Canberra, right? The solution is troll them, like they get away with it. That's how they're so influential, right? The Queensland Resources Council, so the Minerals Council version in Queensland put out some information ahead of the Queensland election saying that they created more jobs in one electorate in Queensland than there were registered voters. They created more jobs than there were people in one. And it simply took looking it up in the electoral statistics to find out that that was just bollocks. So actually, like, putting the pressure back on them, chasing their numbers, they're not actually that sophisticated or intellectual, but they get away with it because no one's chasing them up. So put the pressure, spend the time, and actually push back, and that's how we create that space.
But ultimately, people should vote for the people who will deliver the change they want.
Well, we've got to know who's not in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry, and that's often difficult. But
usually on the public
Richie,
record.
talk to Sam later at the Daily Oz so he can do up some nice shiny tiles that expose that kind of information, and then we'll share it all. I think that's a good form of trolling. Okay, there was a number of other things I wanted to cover off, gas-led recovery, yawn, and some other issues that are incredible distractions in this debate, but we'll have to leave that for another time, and hopefully there will be another time. We've got one last question that's coming in through video from Turia Pitt, who I think is down the south coast, to finish this session off.
Hello, so I want to know what are the most powerful actions that a 30-year-old can take to make a positive impact?
Awesome. Now, did you see how quick her question was? Panel. This is actually, I think I've got instructions. This does have to be a TikTokable answer. It's got to be under 30 seconds. And I might start with Sophia.
Okay, so how you vote, we've already covered off. How you spend your money, every time you open your wallet, you're making a political statement, so you should use your money wisely, and how you save your money. Where you put your money in the bank and where you put your super, that's all investment money that's going to help technologies to come along, and that money makes a difference. So use the influence of your vote, how you save your money and how you spend your money.
Awesome. Richie?
Work on climate change. Find a way to make your job about climate change and then spend most of your time doing it.
Awesome. 10 seconds.
Reconnect with others who think like you and people that have skills that you may not have, and then plan to take over.
I'm going to share my one here. I just thought of it just now, but it is what I believe. I think the best way is to get engaged in the thing we love. And what we love more than anything else is this planet. Get out into nature, be in nature, be nature, because this is our nature. And we as humans are incredible at fighting to save what we truly love. That's when momentum truly happens.
Get involved, join a political party, join an active group, and be the change you want to see.
Adam.
I agree with Matt. You know, very few people.
Awesome.
Very few people join political parties. Join the party that you feel closest to. Influence that organisation. If no one does represent you, be active in the community. Run for local council. Be the change you want to see.
Wonderful, Jess.
What Adam said, and gardening. The answer is always gardening. If you want to feel good, if you want to, you know, believe in yourself and your capacity to transform something, you know, quickly, and also meet other people. I think, you know, change happens when we have really strong communities that are connected. And, you know, gardens, dogs, jiu-jitsu, if that's what you're into. I am, but, you know, connect with other people.
Get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, panellists. I might get you to give a round of applause for their time and their wonderful words. And our youthful celebrities, of course, as well. I also want to thank again tonight's sponsors, Future Super and, of course, Bank Australia. And I just want to share with you one last thought in terms of getting you feeling hopeful and excited and about the momentum that often happens in this area. Erica Chenoweth put together a study where she studied every single activist activity or peaceful activism from 1900 through to 2014. And what she found was that where there was 3.5% of any given population engaged in mindful, peaceful activism of the kind that everybody here this evening has discussed, the change happened within a year. Now, this is really something that I drop into the recalcitrant uncool conversations when I come across people who feel there's no hope. Humans are incredible. This kind of new energy economy is entirely possible. I think we're probably close to a 3.5% figure, and if everybody here and everybody listening out there on the live stream can get energised by this and join that movement, exponential and incredible change will happen prior to 2050. I'll leave it on that note. I'd also like to say, just as one last actionable, we really want you to get activist. We want you to fire up, be a good pest, get engaged, be the change you want to see. And we'd love for your next steps to be going to the Daily Oz. They've got it on Instagram, I think in their bio, they've got an action pack. And that may help you. It may be a really good starting point for anyone who's new to all of this. Thanks again, and please stick around for the next panel.
Well done.
I'd like to welcome you here to New Energy. Thank you very much for coming along. Give yourselves a round of applause for being good people on a Thursday night.
Is it Thursday?
It's a Thursday night, people, and we're here for an evening of shaking things up a bit. This is a night for communication. It's a night to get interested and to help you find some skills to talk about climate change, and hopefully by the end of this evening it'll all be fixed and we can start talking about other things, which should be delightful. My name is Alex Dyson. I'm going to be the moderator for this half of the panel, and yeah, it's basically a little discussion starter where we can start talking about some real world ways which you can either have conversations with people and help get them on board the climate change effort, or even what you can do in your own life with your own money, with your own resources, with your own time, with your own energy. And so we're really looking forward to having an open, robust discussion. We're going to cut the crap. We're going to talk turkey, because turkeys are the most honest of all birds. Very direct, very open, and they believe that the climate change issue needs fixing. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to our incredible panel, but I should tell you who I am. I'm Alex Dyson. I used to work at Triple J, podcaster, I DJ sometimes, an author, and last year I was pissed off enough to run in the federal election in my hometown of Warrnambool, in the electorate of Wannon, against the Education Minister, Dan Tehan. Didn't win it. Look, didn't win it. 10% of the vote, respectable. But I think I was the only candidate who got their signatures from everyone whilst I was DJing at the local nightclub. So I handed all these documents to the AEC, and I could see the person go, "Why are there beer stains on this form?" But it is possible to do. We're going to chat about it tonight, a few ways that you can get involved. And it is made possible tonight. It wouldn't have been able to happen, well, without the incredible person sitting next to me on my right here, but also a few sponsors have helped us out tonight. WWS Renewables Nations Program, a plan to make Australia a renewable energy exports powerhouse. They've helped put on tonight, so a big round of applause for them, if that's all right. And also 5B, a clean tech company on a mission to make the delivery of solar power cheaper, faster and more accessible than ever before. Let's get a Mexican rave going for 5B from that side. Way, there it goes across the room. Beautiful. There's energy moving across. It's absolutely incredible. Now, our panel tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is a team of movers. They're a team of shakers, and they're all getting involved in the climate fight in different ways. We're going to find out about them. There's athletes amongst them. We've got musicians. We've got activists. We've got business leaders. And they work in entirely different fields, but they all believe and they have a real big passion for creating a better world. And so we're going to be meeting them right now. Let's start at this far end, and please give her a round of applause. Amelia Telford. Millie is a young Aboriginal and South Sea Islander woman from Bundjalung country and the National Director of the Seed Indigenous Youth Climate Network, an incredible organisation. So welcome, Millie.
Thank you for having me.
Next to Millie is Daisy Jeffrey. Yeah. Daisy is an 18-year-old author of On Hope and former organiser in the school climate strikes, the most recent of which was one of the largest protests in Australian history. She's 18. Does that mean you're on schoolies tonight?
Yeah, sort of. Then COVID sort of got in the way of all those plans.
So let's give her a good night tonight, because this is schoolies people for Daisy. What a young upstart, incredible work. Next to me is Holly Rankin, aka Jack River. An ARIA-nominated musician and climate activist, and the founder and curator of multiple festivals, including the event we're here this evening. So welcome, Holly. Thank you very much for having us at your cool party. Next to me on this side, Grace Palos. Give her a big clap. Who leads the creative team at Future Super, a super fund that shows people the power of their money to change the world. And in a 20-second conversation with Grace before this, my world has been changed. So I can't wait for you to hear a little bit more about it as well. Next to Grace is David Pocock. Recently retired from rugby, one of Australia's greatest union players and long-time advocate for climate action, recently co-founding Frontrunners, which is a movement for athletes working towards a healthy future. He's currently studying a Masters in Sustainable Agriculture. He's absolutely scrumptious. Please welcome you again, David Pocock. Got to keep up with these puns tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And at the end, Adrian Ace Buchan, a pro surfer and activist. Give him a round of applause. He's one of the world's best surfers. He's also an ocean and climate advocate and recently founded Surfers for Climate action. So there it is, your panel for the second half of New Energy. One big more clap for everybody. That would be great. Now, they're in different areas. We want to welcome them. We want to find out why. I mean, don't have as many degrees as the people up here, but I did do a bit of screenwriting in university. And one of the things is to get the characters' motivations. All right. So we're going to go from the end, and we're going to ask, why are you here tonight? Why do you believe in this incredible fight and movement towards a sustainable future? Let's start with you, Millie Telford. Please introduce yourself and tell us why you're here.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for being here. Also just want to acknowledge country. We started with the welcome, which was really beautiful, but yeah, acknowledge Gadigal country of the Eora Nations, and I know there's some mob in the room, shout out to you at the back. But yeah, my name's Millie Telford, proud Bundjalung woman, and I mean, sometimes when people ask why, I'm like, why not? Like, you know, in this day and age, we don't really have a choice, and as Aboriginal and Indigenous people, often we're born into this fight. And so I think for me, you know, it was always a value that my parents instilled in us around looking after country and looking after one another. And it was when I started first seeing changes, you know, along the east coast the north coast of New South Wales, on the east coast of Australia. That's when I started asking questions about, like, if these are the changes that I've seen, what are the changes that, you know, my family and old people and ancestors have seen over time? And I just felt such a deep responsibility. So got involved in an environment group at school, and eventually, you know, led to this work supporting more young mob to get active across the country.
Awesome. Incredible. Daisy, 18 years old, please tell us, why are you here on this panel tonight?
I'm here because it affects all of our futures. We sort of thought we'd be seeing the worst repercussions of climate change really for my generation, or significant repercussions, and we're actually seeing them for all of us here on the stage and out in the audience right now. You know, I've grown up with a bit of awareness about climate change, and I felt like I'm an inner city white kid, you know, middle class, and I feel like with that privilege, with that capacity to help be able to drive change, you know, that I had to grasp it with both hands. And, you know, as I've been doing this for, 2 years now, so it's not that long, but in my young 18, you know, all my 18 years of life, that's a significant chunk. And the more I've gotten involved, the more I've learned, and the clearer it's become to me that climate justice is absolutely imperative, you know, for a safe future. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm fighting.
Incredible. Holly Rankin, Jack River, we could be all at home watching The Crown tonight. You've brought us all here. What is your inspiration for this whole event, and what makes you interested in this line of work?
Such big questions, and follow two amazing women. So I grew up, I'll try and be quick, I grew up on Warramai country, up in Foster. I grew up, you know, in the ocean, in nature all the time. So like as a kid and growing up in high school, I was naturally an environmental kind of nerd. But I was also really interested in politics for some reason. I don't know why. Like in year 4.
Oh, they're so sexy. I mean, you have to be.
So sexy. Yeah. Just look at them. Yeah. No offense.
That's all right. The Polly's pissed off already there. We can talk about him.
No. Yeah, I've been kind of interested in this system of government. Like we elect these people. It seems like such a great idea, and we're living in a country where we're kind of lucky to have a relatively democratic system. So I guess my passions come in, like you all know, I'm a musician, but I just see such a disconnect between how my generation's feeling, how I'm feeling, how Daisy's feeling, how Millie's feeling, and the communities that we represent. I feel like there's such a disconnect between the people sitting here making these decisions, and we can feel that, and we all know that. So we're here tonight because I like making friends with everybody and bringing them together around really important things. And I guess, yeah, you know, we know what we're facing over our lifetimes, and I want to be able to like relax one day and know that, you know, shit's sorted, but it's, you know, it's not happening yet, so that's why we're here.
Until then, we press on. Grace Palos, what about yourself? What brings you here?
I actually came to climate action through the social justice movement. So I'm from the US, and
the trigger switch for me really was moving to Australia and seeing the fragility of the ecosystem and like how everything's just like the dial's up, right? So like, I mean, and every single day is more of an example that motivates me to take action and makes me feel like there's no other thing that I want to be doing with my life.
Incredible. David, what about yourself? What makes you interested in climate change?
Well, I think we get so caught up in the stats and the science side of things, but I think behind it all is everything that we love, all the people we love, all the places we love. And I guess as an immigrant to Australia, fallen in love with this place, and we're not doing a very good job at looking after it. And having family and friends back in somewhere like Zimbabwe, where they simply don't have the resources to be dealing with worst case runaway climate change. There's a lot of responsibility on rich countries like Australia to be leading, despite what our politicians might try and tell us.
Absolutely. And finally, at the end, Ace.
Yeah, I guess my journey into activism, somewhat similar to David's. I'm a first generation Australian. My parents left Africa, in search for a better life. So I feel incredibly lucky to have been brought up in a country like Australia. But I remember a moment in primary school, we were studying the environment, and it was around the same time that I was also discovering, my backyard and falling in love with the ocean and surfing and discovering all these amazing national parks that our First Nations people had looked after. And then also being confronted by the idea that we weren't actually looking after this. And, I think that was confronting to me, much like, that moment you realise your own mortality as a young person. And I think from that moment on, I knew from a young age that I wanted to be a surfer, but I think I also knew that I wanted to use the platform that I've got to do something beyond my own career. So I've got 3 kids of my own now, and, I want to hand on something special to them as well too. So I think I feel that responsibility in that way.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to everybody. Welcome to you. Welcome if you are watching on the live stream as well. We're going to be getting some questions from our incredible guests who are joining us down here. We're going to put them to the panel, and hopefully we can give you some real world examples of things that you're able to do within your own lives, and hopefully push us towards the right path to at least having a plan, I think is a good way to start. To kick it off, let's get the person asking our very first question, the host of the Triple J Hack program, Avani Dias. Hey Avani, take it away.
Hello. Get a round of applause, it's exciting.
It's still starting off hard with Avani. She asks some very tough questions of politicians every weeknight from 5 p.m. So be wary.
So obviously in this role I get to hear from young Australians every day all over the country, and it's amazing to see the momentum climate change has built and so much, anger and passion among those people. But I'm keen to hear from you, Millie, because obviously this is a fight that should be led by First Nations according to so many different people, and you've created Seed Mob, which is to get young First Nations people involved in this fight. But do you think that young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are leading this global movement?
Thank you for the question. It's a question of are we leading and should we be leading? And I think the answer is twofold. Like, we absolutely should be, and we absolutely are. But I think what we need to acknowledge is that this is an issue that is not only about the environment; it's an issue of justice and people. And in order to really look at solving this issue, we need to address the root causes. And when you look at the root causes, it's the systems that I guess have led to where we are in this crisis, and it's the fact that some people's lives are valued more than others, and whether that's Indigenous people, whether that's women, it's also about, where people live. And we heard on the panel earlier, it's like, well, if it's not in my backyard in Sydney, how come it's allowed to be in, how come we're allowed to frack in the Northern Territory, but we can't on the northern beaches of Sydney? And so I think this is an issue about justice and actually really changing the systems that we live in. And it's about shifting power as well. And I think right now, Indigenous people around the world are rising up, and we are incredibly powerful, but we've been told for so long that we're not and that we don't have a voice. And so I think really what's going on right now is a massive shift in the world, but we need allies like a lot of you in the room to be able to stand with us. And I remember being the only Indigenous young people in a room just like this, actually, and it was filled to the brim. And it was really overwhelming being one of the only Indigenous young people there and actually being asked to speak on the issue on behalf of Indigenous people. And I was like, well, I actually can't do that. I can speak on behalf of myself. But we are an incredibly diverse, community of people across this country, and our communities are on the front lines of climate change, whether it's rising sea levels in the Torres Strait, droughts, heat waves, floods, bushfires, and our people are also on the front lines of the causes of climate in terms of the digging up and destruction of country for coal, oil and gas. And, if that's not more of a reason for us to lead, I don't know what is, but it's communities that are most affected by any issue, whether it's climate change, domestic violence. That was a really powerful song earlier. I just want to shout out to I don't know. Alex Astronaut, yes? But that really touched me because I was like, these issues are super connected, and I can't think about solving climate change without thinking about solving so many of the other systemic injustices in the world. So we are leading, and we need to be leading, and stand with us.
Yeah, wow. One of the ways that you're using your voice as well would be protest, whether it is the climate marches or the BLM rallies that have been happening. But in the current situation we find ourselves in, those sort of things have been put on hold. So maybe Daisy, you could give us an insight into this as well. How are you sort of innovating and keeping the spotlight on these massive issues when things like public protests have had to take a back seat?
Well, I just want to say, Indigenous people across the world are really leading this movement, but in the media it doesn't look like it, right? And part of the reason that I'm on this stage tonight, part of the reason I have this platform is because I'm a white middle-class inner-city kid. And the media really loves to catch on to that. And, Greta Thunberg is incredible. She has been so brave and she has fought so hard, but she is by no means the first girl to go out and fight for climate justice. There were many, women of colour, young women of colour before her who've gone out and fought, but they haven't had the opportunity of being caught up, or by, caught by someone walking past, by that media, by that social media frenzy. And, Greta herself acknowledges that, part of the reason that she was sort of initially swept up in that media frenzy is because she is white. And we really need to see the media image diversify, and part of that is actually putting these stories out there, these stories that need to be heard, and not diversity for the sake of tokenism, but diversity for the sake that it makes our movement stronger. The more stories, the more insight, the better. And, as Millie said, First Nations people are first and foremost affected by the climate crisis. And as they should be leading, publicly as well as behind the scenes. And then the other thing, what you're saying about, organising during COVID, it's bloody hard. It's not gonna lie, we had, I've graduated now, so I'm sort of moving out of school strike because it's a school kid space. But we had an enormous strike planned for May 15th, which was cancelled because of COVID. And from basically the beginning of ISO until maybe August, I was just having a long mental breakdown because I thought, how the fuck are we gonna, what do we do? How do we do this? And social media is great. There have been great political campaigns that have been run even in the US during this time on social media, but I still don't think it has the same visual impact as people out in the street, and particularly the impact of those photos then going onto social media.
And the same feeling as well.
Yeah, and it's just really difficult because you don't get that same feeling of really coming together. And however, that's what we've got. So it's
Has anyone found some really cool ways to cut through during this time? Anyone?
Just trolling politicians.
Trolling politicians, good. Being that pest that you are, David.
No, I'm joking. That's Holly's job.
That's my job.
Okay, for
my
sure.
new job.
Yeah, well, as things open up, hopefully there is a way to get back and you know.
I went to Canberra to troll them personally.
Really? Tell us more, please.
We'll talk about that later. Or now. Oh.
You brought it up, come on.
No, well, Dave said it was my job. No, I just as musicians, we've had this year off basically, and thankfully got JobKeeper, so thought I really need to use this, money from the government
Oh, it sucks to be them. They're paying you to come and annoy them. Oh, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, so they paid me to come to Canberra, and I think I did in 2 days 15 meetings with MPs.
Wow.
And it wasn't telling them what to do or asking them anything specific. It was literally just breaking the ice and saying hey, I'm in music and I care about these things, and how do you talk to young people? If we're speaking on social media, is that where you're listening? Because if we're just speaking in one place and they're not listening in that place, then there's a big problem. Anyway,
so
that's
can
me.
we just call up and organise a meeting with people?
Totally, you can.
You can do that. So if you live stream, make sure you do it.
I don't know, we tried with Scott Morrison's office.
Oh, Scott's hard.
That's boss level.
Yeah.
You got to beat a few of the minions before you get up to
We tried.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, I was in Madrid last year and I couldn't get a meeting with Angus Taylor, and I was literally I stood behind him in a coffee line and nagged him for 20 minutes. And
what?
And it's, because everyone, you get 30,000 people who, every year we have this conference of the parties, right? And it's where things like the Kyoto Protocol was decided, and then the Paris Climate Agreement, which we all know about. And so ambitions are supposed to be raised every 5 years. So last year was the 25th Conference of the Parties, or COP25. And this year was supposed to be that next raising of ambitions. So something that I really wanted to say, but couldn't, the last panel, is that, we're talking about net zero by 2050 in the Paris Climate Agreement, as if it's something, as if that is the great thing that we need to commit to, and that's the amazing thing that people across the world should be doing. But it's not. It's actually 5 years ago. I mean, the negotiations, the success of that agreement, in the first place, the fact that that agreement was reached was incredible. But even, the top negotiator agreed that it was below what we needed. And so the fact that the COP26 has now been delayed until August next year is not to freak anyone out, but it is extraordinarily worrying. So we're really behind on climate, and we have a government that is, not only it's not receptive to what the public is saying, it's only receptive to it's quite introspective in terms of who it listens to, ideological, greed fuel, push it.
But you can get a meeting if you are persistent enough. So there's our first takeaway of the night: book in a meeting.
Book it in.
It is that thing, face to face. It's different. You can ignore protests on television. You could put emails into spam and pretend it never got to you. But if you're there in person asking them these questions, it's very difficult on a human level to ignore you. Yeah.
Book a meeting.
Exactly. Book a meeting.
Avani?
All right, well, let's move on to our next question, which is a video question. Phoebe Tonkin has been kind enough to...
Has Avani got
Oh, sorry, we got a second one for Avani. Sorry,
She's been standing so patiently.
When's my question?
Avani, I reckon you're ready to go. Go for it, Av.
Thank you. I mean, you sort of said, face-to-face meetings obviously make an impact, but you can't deny the huge strikes that happened last year and the momentum that was built, and then COVID hit and everything was ruined and climate change was put to the side. And, large gatherings, there's still a future prospect. We don't know when they'll be coming back. You're all involved in activism in some way. What is the future of this movement? Considering protesting, big gatherings are putting pressure on politicians, and that's a really solid way to do that. So how do we do it without those protests? Feel free to go. Anyone? David, maybe you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of...
You went as seen in the eyes of the law, illegal routes at one point in your time.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I certainly think
would you recommend
non-violent
that
direct
avenue?
action has a role to play. I mean, you look through the history of social change, it's not often that people in charge just say, "Oh, yeah, this seems like a good idea. We're gonna change." Look at any issue, the government's usually the last ones to be dragged to it. I do feel like one of the failures has been telling stories about how great the future could actually be. Like you watch something like Damon Gameau's 2040, you kind of walk out thinking, "Oh shit, seems a bit too good to be true." And there's all these great little things happening that don't really make the news. Like in Canberra, we're now 100% renewable electricity, and our power bills came down this year by 5%. But you're not reading a lot about that. So I think part of it can actually be telling the good stories when they happen.
Yeah, for sure.
To that point too, I think people will stop waiting for government. Like, I feel like there's so much conversation about how we need political change, which we do, we absolutely do. But there's so much that we can do as a people, and I think joining together to make change and keep being pests, and just so that like they have no option but to start acting.
I think, getting the government to do that is a massive thing, but the people, at least in this country, elect the governments. Ace, you were talking, in your communities when it comes to surfing, how can you, use that community to then help change a large group of people's minds, or at least get them thinking about this big issue?
Yeah, I think, certainly as athletes, you get told to stay in your lane, to stay out of politics. But I mean, for me, politics is just, a lens through which we view the world and the things around us. Maybe having a blue badge on your Instagram account helps you to get a meeting. But, personally, I know for me this year, in the absence of being able to congregate because of COVID, I hassled my local MP, Lucy Wicks. We're currently fighting petroleum exploration permit, which stretches from Sydney through to Newcastle, and unfortunately Lucy's been the only MP in the affected zone that hasn't stood up against it, and I've been on her case, and we're going to go down to Canberra on Monday and stand on the lawns of Parliament with the Surfrider Foundation and Save Our Coasts, who have gathered nearly 100,000 signatures. So I think if you're worried about something that has a scientific basis, as we've spoken about tonight, you will find people that are worried about it as well. And I think if you band together, many drops make an ocean. I think you can create great change.
Oh, surfer making an ocean reference. Love that. We love that here at U Energy. I think it is time to get that video question now from actress Phoebe Tonkin. Let's have a look.
What would you say to young people who don't feel engaged with the climate change movement or feel powerless to make a difference?
Right.
I might answer that. I feel like you're very articulate.
Well, let's get it. Who's the oldest on the panel and who's the youngest? I reckon Daisy would be the youngest. Anyone want to put their hand up for...
Are you looking at...
Dob, anyone in? You do have a couple of kids, so maybe we'll start with you, Daisy, and then head down to the other end of the spectrum.
Our facials are working, gals.
Sort of like, question about disengagement and hopelessness, or not necessarily like, a feeling like you can connect with people like you to create change. So it's like, before I got involved with the climate movement, I was a person I was a kid who was really concerned, but felt like as an individual, there really wasn't much I could do. And fortunately, there were kids braver than me who got out on the streets, who I was very lucky to join to help create change. And there were a bunch of kids, around Australia who were in communities that are perhaps more hostile to climate action, climate justice than, communities towards the coast, particularly, cities. So there's a lot of disengagement. Like following September 20th, which was, we had 80,000 people take to the streets in Sydney to the point where we crashed like the 4G, and 300,000 people across Australia, and we had 7 point something million across the world, which is insane, and yet nothing. We talk about how one person joining with another, you're able, and then another and another, you can create a tidal wave of difference. we had a fucking tsunami and we didn't hear a peep from Parliament.
That you inspired the whole country.
I hope, but I think it was really distressing for us to think that we had well and truly demonstrated Australian public support for, climate justice, and yet Parliament didn't care enough to even respond. That's 300,000 people is a lot of people, particularly in Australia. We don't really get out in the streets and protest.
Well, let's chuck it down to Ace on your end of things. I'd call it the jaded end, would you say? Over the years, you can really, like when you cop that much of people, politicians not paying attention, you can really think, well, what's the point of doing this? How do you measure success sort of moving forward? And apologies, Davey, stealing your wave analogies with the tsunami. I'll leave that to the surfers.
No.
This point forward, please, Dave. No. But what do you think? Like, as you grow, is there anything you've learned about measuring that success and not becoming complacent when you do, get ignored by these people?
Yeah, I'd hope to think that we're not jaded, and I think the fact that we're all here tonight demonstrates that we certainly aren't. And just listening to the first panel and the bipartisanship of the politicians coming to that agreement in New South Wales, I know definitely, for me, my generation, it felt like there was so much apathy towards politics in general, and that was frustrating. And even in my sport, I felt that it was hard to kind of find that commonality at times, on some of these divisive issues. But I feel, definitely through 2020 and through COVID, that there's a much more increased kind of sense of consciousness around these issues. And I feel inspired by the great things that are happening, whether that's through, what Matt spoke about tonight and, the agreement they've come to put in place in New South Wales, whether, that's ACT being 100% powered by renewables. There's so many good things out there, and I think if we can focus on those rather than focusing on this kind of, gulf of differences that lies between us, I think we can kind of harness that good energy.
Can I jump in, Alex?
Absolutely.
Well, I was just going to say something that has helped me this year and an important shift in my head, because for so many years I felt, obviously like we all do, so overwhelmed and dreaded and like, what do I do? Do I do this? Like, how do I fit it all in? And I guess something that really helped me was taking it back to the individual and my local community. And for me, that immediately came back to the First Nations people in my community. I'm out here maybe on my platform saying, we need Uluru Statement from the Heart, we need this, we need that. But had I reached out on Yuin country to my local elders and gone for a walk, like, we get so obsessed with this big idea and the big word of climate change, but like, can we just calm down and if you're struggling with that, take it back to your individual power in your community and just your own personal connections and knowledge. And yeah, this is kind of an element of tonight is like, I know you all, we're here, like let's talk. Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of the young people, how do we get the young people engaged? Let's go to Grace, because when I'm not that young, but when I hear the word superannuation, my eyes glaze over. So what hope do you have, Grace, with the young people when it is a massive way that you can help fix the problem of climate change?
Yeah, my eyes used to glaze over with superannuation too, and I think that's active by the super funds. They want your eyes to glaze over. When I started sort of looking into super and investments around climate activism, one of the stats that continues to blow my mind is that there is enough money in superannuation to fund our transition to renewables 10 times over. And so that stat blows my mind just by itself, right? That we all have ownership of that money and can make that change and fund that transition the moment we want to. But then also the fact that in so many other countries, that wealth isn't held by the people. It is held by government or places that you don't have access to. And so this collective activism and this collective action that we can use with our money really inspired me to get involved with super.
Oh, sensational. Millie, have you spoken to your friends much about superannuation at the clubs?
Those who know me will know you probably won't see me at the club. Look, no shame. I'm a bit of a grandma. But I mean, I remember first talking to my friends about a bunch of this stuff, and you know, it's hard at first, but actually it's super easy. Like actually joining Future Super, like you can do it in like 30 seconds or something, you know, and like they do it all for you. But yeah, it's crazy to know that that money is being invested in fossil fuels, and you can like transition that, whether it's your super company or what bank you're with or what energy company you're with, you know, like that's a big one. Like Origin Energy. You know, about 1 in 5 Australians, I think, are Origin Energy customers, and yet there was a question earlier about greenwashing and, you know, claiming to take action on these big issues to be woke and cool, and yet here's Origin Energy who claim to be all about good energy, and yet they're wanting to open up and frack the Northern Territory for gas, opening up one of the biggest fossil fuel basins or gas basins in the Southern Hemisphere, and that just, you can't take action on climate change and be doing that. And so like these are really important conversations that we need to have, and I think that's where it all starts, is through conversations.
Absolutely. One thing that has been brought up is like making our voices heard, and part of that is the media. And so one of the difficult things is to, you know, the people who control the media can control whether the news is coming through, that Canberra is running on all renewables and the energy bills are cheaper. And so we've got a question now from someone in the media. It's Sam Kozlowski from the Daily Oz.
Hi guys. So we speak to 70,000 young Australians every day and bring them the news on Instagram. What role do you want the media to play in the climate transition debate? Do you want us to be fact givers? Do you want us to be giving compelling arguments? Do you want us to be giving the good news, David, as you said before? Where do you want us to sit?
Who wants to take this one? David, let's
well, I think if you're talking the media in general, I think number one, tell the truth. I think that's something in Australia that we haven't done. You wouldn't know that we're in a climate emergency if you flip through most of the papers in Australia, and yeah, that's not telling the truth. That's not news.
To that point, actually, a lot of super funds have been making net zero by 2050 commitments, right? And the media has been picking it up and writing about it. Well, media, my kind of media, of like AFR, right? And
Australian
it's
Financial
like
Review.
the story is, but
how dare you?
Like they don't talk about what these super funds are invested in today. Like who cares about 2050 is too late. But like telling the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth, I think would really help to add breadth to this story.
It could be a bit of a battle between, you know, if I feel in you could be some people who are willing to go the extra mile, bend the truth, you know, do a selective truth, and if the other side is playing a straight bat down the line, how is that balance going to be maintained? It is going to be going towards the other side. What do you think of that?
I think,
or Daisy?
Sorry, can I just
yeah.
Look, I think, you know, we suddenly have, you know, Murdoch media are running, you know, propagandist bullshit, and, you know, there's not really much else to it. That's what it is.
Malcolm said it nicely recently on Q&A.
Yeah, nice that he grew a spine again.
Pulling no punches tonight.
I'm allowed to say that. Yeah, no, it's like we have more objective media that we can go to, but sometimes what I worry about is that we also see, you know, again, it's this rhetoric that people were talking about earlier. It's like, you know, people asking, do you believe in climate change? I'm like, no, it's do you accept the science? Do you understand it? And too often what we see is, instead of an actual balanced debate between people who understand the science, what we see is, you know, a battle between science and, you know, what is essentially myth or conspiracy. And so it's not, you know, 97% of the world's leading climate scientists understand that climate change is real, that it's hurting us. And so it's like if you were out on a tarmac and you were heading towards a plane and 97 of the 100 mechanics told you that plane is crap, like it's going to crash, and 3 told you, oh no, it's fine, just get on, it'll be right, you know, who are you going to listen to? Like I would be panicking if 1 told me it was bad. And so it's about acknowledging that objectively we should be, you know, the question is how do we best listen to the science and pursue, you know, climate justice, and that's what objective media should be reporting on. We shouldn't be continuing to entertain conspiracy theorists who are essentially funded by enormous fossil fuel corporations who don't have people's best interests at heart.
Well, Millie, when it comes to starting organisations, with the media, what do you think? Would it be better for the government to regulate how much of a single interest can own media? Is it better to, you know, start paying for the subscriptions of media that does that because, you know, other places' revenue is falling? Should we create new media? Should we regulate the stuff that we have? All of the above? What do you reckon?
Sure. I mean, I think it comes down to like the stories that we're telling as well, and like what stories get up and what don't. Like, I mean, Daisy even said it earlier, like, you know, there's actually an image of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daisy, but there's an image of Greta standing with a bunch of other young women, and a black girl gets cut out of the shot in the media. And so, you know, I mean, that says a lot in itself, but it's like, climate change isn't just an issue about the future. It's not just an issue about jobs and the economy. It's an issue about people and communities. And like the more we can tell the stories of communities that have been on the front lines of these issues, and you know, not only not as victims, but as like powerful people that need to be leading and that we need to listen to, because they're going to be the ones that are best placed to know what transition and what work needs to happen in their communities. And I think for, you know, there's so much that we can learn from Indigenous people, but when it comes to these stories, like, you know, we've seen it throughout our own history where we've created our own media channels because our stories aren't getting told, so we're going to just tell them ourselves, and we tell them better in our own way anyway, you know, because we don't play into the, you know, the deficit discourse around how people often talk about our, you know, the powerlessness of our people and being victims, but actually put ourselves in the position of being the heroes. And we need more hero stories. Like, we need to see the stories of the solutions and people that are just getting on with the job. And like, that's what's going to give people hope, I think. And so when it comes to the media, like what you can do, like profile these stories. There was a really great one of my colleague Tish, who is a Torres Strait Islander woman. It's in Junkie. It just came out this afternoon. And it's about her communities in the islands who've been calling for action on climate change for like 25 years or something, when the you know, the sea walls in the Torres Strait started breaking. And Tish, love you because I know you're listening. Tish had to go and apologise to her people and her ancestors because their bones were being washed away into the ocean. There's burial grounds that are being impacted. You know, like this is, it's actually super hard to talk about sometimes because it's so emotional, it gets you so fired up. But that's, I think, where we need to connect with people, because it is about connection, whether it's to one another, connection to country, hearing those stories, because it's values that bring people with us. And it's not always, I mean, for some people it might be the science, for some people it might be jobs in the economy, but actually when it comes down to it, it's values that shift people, and values that have shifted, you know, throughout time to create the social change that we have created so far. I can't even remember what the question was.
No, that's okay. You covered it all.
Thank you, Millie.
Thank you so much. Holly, when it comes to, staying on the media, when it comes to consuming media, how does everyone feel about blocking out the media that we don't like? Or how do you feel about consuming everything so that you get the opposite point of view?
Yeah, I think Daisy wrote about it in her book, potentially, or I definitely got this one from Daisy. Her book is incredible. You can read it in like half an hour. I guess, you know, growing up, I've probably been guilty of reading within my bubble and getting excited about things within my bubble, but I definitely think it's so important to read widely, and if you have the time to understand the context of media, especially here in Australia, because we have so very little outlets, who owns what, and it's great banter with your your random uncle who seems to be the star of the show. You know, it's great to ask your father-in-law, like, who owns the Daily Telegraph? Like, do you know? You know, it's just like so crazy that so many Australians, especially in regional, you know, Australia where I've always lived, you know, pick up the Daily Telegraph like it's so chill. It's really scary. Yeah.
What about yourself, David? What's the Canberra media scene like? I know we used to always get beaten by Scotty and Nige in the ratings, but who else are the big wheelers and dealers there? And do you pay attention to it? So do you know how to communicate with people for that? They're the only news source.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Certainly wouldn't want to be supporting some of the media out there, but it probably is good to be understanding a range of voices and where people are coming from. And you know, I think it's one of those things where you actually, when you get to know people who have potentially opposite views to you, it's very hard to hate people up close. And I think you realise how much more we have in common as humans and how many shared values. And ultimately, we're all wanting similar things for the future. And so I think it's really important to be building that common ground with the people around us. You know, that's where we can all start.
Definitely. Have you got an example of like a conversation you had with someone and something clicked? What's something that you've said to someone? Because I mean, rugby union would be an interesting place with interesting conversations, and you know, climate change might come up sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you take a rugby team, and I think it's a really good snapshot of society. Like it's pretty diverse. I think the people who really get it are often people from Pacific Island backgrounds because it's real. You know, they know people who are having to move their crop fields because of rising sea levels. And so I do think, you know, those human stories are so important. And yeah, you even look at the bushfires, like everyone knows someone who was affected by the, if not the fires, then the smoke. So
absolutely,
those conversations are important, and we can all be having them with people we love. But I think not sort of going at each other, but trying to build some sort of common ground first.
Is that sort of where front runners came from? Can you tell us a little bit about on that and why the sporting world is a really great place to start this sort of thing?
Well, I think sport has played a role in so much social change over the years. And for me, sport is at its best when it's challenging society to be more inclusive and to be more progressive on issues. I've tried to do that with whatever platform I've had, and obviously had a huge amount of help from my partner, Emma. And so Frontrunners is really sort of her baby. She's been driving it, and the idea behind it is to try and lower the barriers for athletes to actually be able to talk about things that they care about, things that they love. And as Ace said, there's this narrative of athletes just stick to footy, mate. We don't want to hear your politics.
LeBron James got told to shut up and dribble, and you know they do cut you down.
But at the end of the day, you're a human being, and you care about things. So it's trying to help athletes feel like they can actually talk about things and simply talk about the things that they love and the things that they care about, and hopefully reach a different audience who are potentially not as interested in things like climate or environment stuff, PEP 11, those sorts of issues.
For sure. Well, Ace, as a surfer, I mean, surfers renowned for their chilled communication style. How do you find yourself talking to people about that and slipping in conversation, or how things pop up in that regard?
Yeah, I think as Dave said, athletes have an ability, through their skill to connect with people across party lines, and we're living in a world, as we've seen in America over the last month, that is hugely divided. And someone like LeBron James, I'd like to think, the great stance that he's taken, on social issues over the last year or so has maybe challenged people that, follow him I have friends that I know, you know, would be challenged by what he's saying, and you know, as a fellow athlete, I'm proud of people like that. I'm proud of, you know, what Dave's done through his career, and I think, you know, we have a responsibility to kind of talk to the kids and to, you know, use this platform to try and bring people together rather than drive them apart.
Absolutely. Is this a sporting injury here, Grace? Was this?
It was.
Oh, really?
Not this level of sport, though. Obviously.
Yeah. What happened to
I was trail running and I tripped on a rock.
Oh, okay. Well, we need to concrete all the trails through, so they're nice and safe.
Trail running is beautiful.
For the future. No, I think we're going to move on to our next question, which is Laura Wells, a marine biologist, model, climate activist. Coming up, Laura, and hit us with a curly one.
I don't know if I have any curly ones, but I guess I want to put this to the two older ducks at the end of the spectrum here, because I'm one of you guys too. I started my career with marine biology, and then I ended up in the world of fashion and modelling, but I've kind of brought it back to my passions now, which is conservation and the ocean and climate. But for you guys, you know, you've had this incredible sporting career, and now you're transitioning to something that is completely different. What would you say to people that are in a different stage of their life? They're not the younger generation, they're middle-aged, they're thinking, what the fuck can I do? You know, they want to take the risk. Can they? How do they do it? What would you recommend?
Yeah, wow. I think firstly, I mean, as an athlete, I've been lucky enough to travel, and I think, you know, travel is fatal to prejudice. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to sit on my board in beautiful places, and I've been unlucky enough to compete in places like Rio, where it's almost, you know, raw sewage, or Indonesia, where you're almost like, you know, riding this plastic barrel. And I've seen people around me who don't have the platform that I have, that are just as passionate. And, you know, I think by going out in your sphere and finding things that are tangible to your life and things that affect you, and banding together with like-minded people, you can have a great influence. I don't think you have to have tens of thousands of followers. I don't think you have to necessarily be extremely talented at anything physically. I think you just need to be passionate and, you know, have a purpose and work bloody hard at it. I think, you know, there's great things that anyone can achieve, and I think all the people on the panel tonight are testament to that.
For sure. David, do you have anything to add to Ace's words there?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a society we're starting to learn that the pursuit of happiness, I don't know, probably doesn't bring the things that we thought. And as humans, what we really need is meaning. And for me, we all have the opportunity in our own lives to muster up the courage which we all have inside us to take that step, to be part, to play our own small role, whatever it may be, whatever that may look like, get outside of our comfort zone, to play our own part in turning the ship around and trying to, you know, head in the direction that we all want and hope that we'll get to. So, you know, one person is not going to change the world, but I think we've all got a small role to play.
Absolutely. Well, it is an existential threat, which can be absolutely overwhelming, and particularly when people are saying it is going to affect the younger generation. I'd really like to look at this end of the room, the young ducks, I guess we could say, if we
They're
are
not
going
that old,
ducks.
I don't think.
No, exactly.
Anyway.
This is a pretty young, hip and happening. I shouldn't say hip and happening. That disproves everything I said. But let's talk about the mental health toll that this threat takes on us. You could be watching at home, and you could be a young person. You could be, like everyone here, quite overwhelmed with what's going on. What are some steps that we'll start with you, Millie, that you take in order to remain positive in your outlook, keep going, and, you know, when things do get a bit overwhelmed, to be able to take a breath and be at peace with yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? Like mental health in this country and around the world, like the rates of people struggling with mental health just keep increasing and will likely continue to at the rate that we're going. But I think it comes back to my same answer in like what you need to do to get involved is like surround yourself with awesome people. And I think that is what keeps me going, like the connection with family, but also just groups of people, often talk about like my titters or like my sisters or, whoever it might be, people who can fill you up with hope and energy, and they can be the people that make you happy. Like, again, I'm referencing one of your songs, but it's like, be with people that make you happy. That just like, I'm not real connected with that. But I think that just goes such a long way because then you've got people that are looking out for you. Like that's a big part of what we do at Seed is just providing a support network because it is really hard. And to have spaces where you can just be real and, cry or laugh or, our mob and people on the front lines of issues like most vulnerable in the world, like we use laughter as a coping mechanism. And I think sometimes if you don't laugh, you cry. And I need a good cry sometimes, but I also just love laughing and surrounding myself with people who care and who can take action together and change the world together. Like I think that's just what it comes back to for me. And then being able to go back home and connect with country. And I can't wait to do that in a couple of weeks because I really need to do that.
For sure. What about yourself, Daisy?
Yeah, I've got a fat dose of climate anxiety.
Oh, no.
Like I had, a massive breakdown when I came back from Madrid because like negotiations had just not gone the way we wanted them to go. And then my hope built back up when the community came together, the Australian community came together during the fires. And with 10 days notice, you had 25, 30,000 people out in the streets in Sydney to demand climate justice. And, that was a pretty healthy dose of hope back in my system, but it wasn't manageable. I'm like, I have to see a psychiatrist now, which is fun. And there's a whole other story we could talk about how our mental health care system is so inaccessible to so many people around Australia, let alone, young people. And but the real sense of hope comes from community, comes from people coming together. And actually, last week I was up on Gumbaynggirr country, which is sort of like Coffs Harbour, Nambucca Heads, that sort of northeast region of New South Wales, and was filming this documentary and got to meet these really incredible Gumbaynggirr people fighting to protect their land from logging from this forestry group. There was so much hostility that even as we were driving up towards the site of the Sovereign Camp, there was this sort of off-brand Chris Hemsworth looking guy who was kicking in the sacred fire. And as soon as he saw us, leapt back into his, four-wheel drive and like raced away. And so that was like a bit disheartening, right? And then, but then actually getting to meet these people, particularly someone who really stood out to me was this elder, Uncle Roger, he's got this sort of Elvis haircut, but completely white, and he's 73, and he's part of the stolen generation, or as he corrected me, kidnapped. Feels like stolen objectifies that generation. And he had someone who had been born on these birthing grounds that had sent, underneath these trees, these birthing trees, which have since been bulldozed, been through such a traumatic experience. And yet he stood here, like he stood, in front of me with this twinkle in his eye, this sense of hope and determination to protect his country, to protect, his land for future generations. And the idea that, there could be this collaboration, in his words, between white fellas and black fellas, to defend this camp, to defend this land in January when the loggers will come back and try to, log this beautiful forest again. That gave him hope. And if, someone who has been through so much can find hope in the future, I think we should all have a healthy dose of hope. And that's sort of how I manage, is I find hope in the community.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And what about yourself, Holly? Balancing music career and activism.
Yeah, I've been
How
thinking,
does,
what's my answer?
yeah, we've had a bit of time.
Yeah, I have. And mine's less profound because I think, again, you guys have all summed it up so great. But my answer is about being awkward and being okay with the awkwardness of stepping out of your comfort zone. And like for me, like as you know, you guys are athletes, I'm a musician, we have similar industries that say stay in your lane, it's showbiz, like keep it together, Holly. Like it's you know, people are afraid when you talk in a way that they haven't heard before, or when you offer a point of view that might be out of the norm. But I just find so much magic in the chaos of figuring out my place in this movement, and it honestly comes down to the people that I meet. I would never have met David Pocock and his partner Emma, who I would count as really good friends now. Like, yeah, being awkward and stepping outside of your zone can bring so many great friendships, like our friendship. You know, we
Being able to vent your frustrations is a great way to keep your mental health together at these things.
Yeah, I think, you know, feeling okay to be awkward and stretching outside of your career or your comfort zone, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, can bring so much like genuine life magic. Like you find your place. And yeah, it's so fun to be able to call up Alex randomly when something's happening in politics and just have a rant. And, you know, that happened because I stepped out of my comfort zone and called you up. And,
absolutely, yeah. And you see the call come through, you go, oh, Ranta Claus is coming to town. Let's have a look here. What's going on? And
you're Ranta Claus.
I might have good rant. I would recommend it to everyone. A rant, it'll change the world. But I do think we're going to move on. We are coming to the end of the night. We have been a little bit behind time, and so we will try and wrap it up. But we do have another question from actress Phoebe Tonkin, I believe.
What are the most powerful actions young people can take right now to make an impact on climate change?
I'm going to throw this one to you, Grace, because you have a real tangible answer to this one.
Yeah, so my answer is switch your super. And the reason I say that is that anytime you get angry at a mining company in Australia, know that super money is funding that mining company. And if we took the super money out of mining companies, the mines would cease to exist. And if the mines cease to exist, Australia could suddenly have a chance at leading the world in renewable energy rather than leading the world in emissions per capita. And it's such an easy action, and I think it's one, you know, we do a bunch of talking, and I think talking is really important and conversation is really important, but our planet needs us to act and needs us to act fast. And so it's something you can do in 5 minutes that can drastically shift our energy grid.
Absolutely. Can you give me an example if I wanted to do that, which I do? Google super? What? Tell me the first 3 steps.
Okay, so most people do kind of what your plan is, but
Host a conference, yep.
You go to Future Super, you fill out an online form, it talks you through it, it takes 5 minutes, and then you're done. And what happens when you do that is that you know your money is not invested in fossil fuels, in gambling, in nuclear weapons, in child slavery, in a whole bunch of things. And I would say to anyone who's interested in the power of their investments or their banking, the things I would be looking for is transparency. Like, opacity is evil here because what it's trying to do is cut you off from the power of your money. And all of us have heard the phrase of like, money makes the world go round, and it's true, that's why we constantly say it. And so I think looking at, you know, does your super fund talk about everywhere it's invested in on its website? Does it make clear its values as a company of what it will invest in and what it won't invest in? And I think the same goes for banks and for home loans, anything where you're putting big amounts of your savings.
Absolutely. Well, I might ask that question to everyone else, but do it as part of the wrap-up of the evening. We might start at this end with you, Ace. That is, what do you think is a powerful action that someone can take is when it's going on? And feel free to throw out any other final thoughts that you may have for us that you would really like to communicate as we finish this incredible evening.
Yeah, thanks. I think one of the things I see with young people especially is like this sense of being really overwhelmed and feeling like to act on climate change they need to be perfect. But I think people should know that, you know, participating in the world as we know it doesn't preclude you from wanting it to be better. You know, not everyone has the means to own an EV, to have solar panels on their roof, to, you know, switch their super. They might not even have super, but if all you can do is talk to your friends and, you know, garden and start a compost, great, like, start there. And obviously we're all going to fall into that spectrum, you know, somewhere, but just get started, because I think you will find like-minded people, you will find your own little niche within that. And I think if we all start to do that, you know, as we heard tonight, you know, it only takes 3.5% of a population to really get engaged in something for it to become a tipping point. You just got to get started.
Absolutely. David?
Two things. The first thing I'd say is get into nature, whether it's gardening, time at your local park, getting to know the birds around your house, the magpie.
Tell us the app. David's got a bird sound app.
A bird sound app?
There's plenty of apps out there for birds, but I mean, I really do think, like, nature is such an amazing healer and can be such a big part of helping provide direction, like a way back for us, because we're clearly off course. The other thing, if you haven't heard of Saul Griffiths, check him out, and he's done a huge amount of work, and his mantra is electrify everything. So
Saul Griffiths?
Saul Griffiths, yeah, and Griffith, I think it is. Get off gas. If you've got a gas connection to your house, look at a heat pump. Basically try and only use electric at home and switch provider and try and use renewables. If everyone did that, it's going to drive some huge change.
Very cool. As we're driving past here, Grace, any final thoughts from you?
Not beyond what everyone has already said. I mean, I just watched the documentary I'm Greta, and I love how she has picked sort of the 4 things that are non-negotiables for her and that she wants to take action on. And I think if everyone did that, it would help sort of bring it down to Holly's point of like a human level and kind of give us focus to like, these are the things I want to do, because it's all too big, but we're all going to try to act together.
Absolutely. Might jump it all the way down to you, Millie, and what are some of the most important things, the crucial thing that young people could do right now, and any other things you'd like to add?
Absolutely. The small changes at home and, you know, changing your super, all of that are going to go a long way. But collective action is really where it's at as well. And that's the stuff that's going to change shift power and change the leaders in society, because we need to not be on the path of business as usual. So we need a massive movement of people. So getting involved in activism, you know, in whatever way you can is really where it's at. I'm going to give you a really specific thing that people can actually do as well. Head to seedmob.org.au/climate justice fund. People may or may not be aware, but SeedMob have been a program of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition for the last 6 years since we started. But just this week on Tuesday, actually, we announced that we're actually going to be becoming our own independent organisation, which would be...
Woohoo! Yeah!
which would be the first and only Indigenous youth-led environmental organisation in the country, which is super bloody exciting. And so there's 3 things that you can do. Firstly, it's donate. We're trying to raise $500,000 before the end of the year to have a pool of money to set ourselves up. 2 is get others to donate. So talk to people, have a conversation, help share it on your platforms, get it out there. And then 3 is do more than donate. So that's you know, an acknowledgement that money alone isn't going to actually switch this. We need people getting out on the streets doing more. There's a page on that site where you can donate, but there's also like 10 other things you can do to support Indigenous-led climate action. So go and do that and educate yourselves and get involved.
What about yourself, Daisy? What do you think is the most important? And give us your final thoughts tonight.
Connect with a friend. Like if you're an individual in a community that you feel really doesn't support you know, your beliefs or, you know, your understanding of the science, then go out on your own, just do it. You never know who'll support you. There'll be a massive group of, you know, people online, a massive community who can come and support you. Yeah, so connect with your friends, chuck me a message on Instagram. It's pretty easy, just look up my name and, you know, I'll connect you with your local, you know, chapter. Go to SeedMob, donate. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all we can do is we can connect with others and fight for, you know, collective climate justice, and that's it, yeah.
Absolutely. And Holly Rankin, Jack River, incredible events that you've helped organise tonight. The brainchild behind it, put it together. What is something that we can do right now that will make a massive impact? And give us your final thoughts on this whole event and where to next.
That's a lot of questions.
What's your favourite colour?
My favourite colour is deep blue, like really dark deep blue.
That's a light blue shirt.
I know, I'm not on brand tonight. You know, tonight we tried to figure out what can we tell people who want to make a change. And that was, you know, switch your super, switch your bank, switch your power. It's donate to a giving circle or donate to someone who's doing the work for you, like Millie. She's spending her whole life doing the work that maybe you want to do. But I absolutely think connecting in locally and, you know, on a community level, but also creating a relationship with your local politician. I just feel like in Australia, we do not use these people. We're not talking to them enough, and they work for us, even though it doesn't seem like it sometimes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think that comes to the end of the second half
Thank
of
you,
New
Alex.
Energy. That is okay. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. It has been really nice to be here in a group of like-minded people. And I think it's one of those things is everyone here, it's funny because it can get into that debate where it's a bit of a back and forth in here, but I think everyone on the stage, everyone in the room, everyone watching, it's all a positive message. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. And so, yeah, I think that's where that conversation starts, where you go, okay, everyone has a really, you know, a good heart and is coming at this from a positive angle. It's a really good place to start. So thanks again for coming through. Please thank the panellists here tonight: Amelia Telford, Daisy Jeffrey, Holly Rankin, Grace Palos, David Pocock, and Adrian Ace Buchan. Before we do go, I do have some final ones because, yeah, as well as, you know, Holly putting this on for us tonight, it absolutely couldn't be done without the help of some incredible sponsors who have been, gotten on board and helped, bring us all together here tonight, put it on for you, put on the live stream as well. So thank you, WWF's Renewables Nation program. Thank you so much. It's been really invaluable for this tonight. And they might be in the room. 5B, cheaper, faster, more accessible solar. Good on you. You've done so much good, and so we really appreciate that one. Get out there, have those conversations, keep the momentum growing, and if you'd like a bit more information, make sure you get the action pack, which you can find by going to Daily Oz on Instagram. That's Daily Oz with an A-U-S. The Daily Oz. It's good stuff. Thank you, Holly. And the action pack's there. Simple, powerful things young Aussies to do can set them up for a zero future today. And I think that comes to an end of a page. So thank you very much for having me. I have been Alex Dyson. This has been an incredible event. And so thank you. Go out there, have fun while changing the world. Let's do it, guys. Come on.
Thank you, Alex.
That's okay.
Am I on the mic? I don't know, but thanks, Alex.
Let's get the lights up. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, everyone.